I like her. I like her. Hey, good morning, everybody. My name is Matt Portman. I'm the lead pastor here. Glad you're here this morning. And before we jump into our teaching today, I actually wanted to fill you in on something I think is pretty exciting, some things that have developed over the last couple of weeks. If you were here a few weeks ago, I had my friend David Merle here to teach on emotional health. And as a part of that day, we actually had Michiana Biblical Counseling out in the atrium to kind of talk to people. And I've said many times that every human on the planet could benefit from counseling. And so we wanted to have a practical step to that message. And I'm really excited that since then, David Hill, if you got a chance to talk to him, he's a great guy. He was here. We've actually kept talking after the service, and we now have actually set up a strategic partnership with Michiana Biblical Counseling. And what this means is there's three things. One is that we get to support another ministry. By the way, that's important. All right, it's important. That's why we do this stuff. We can support what their efforts are doing. And I found out little details that actually came out of the First Baptist Church in Elkhart, is where this all started. And there's just a lot of great things going on with what they have going on there at Michiana Biblical Counseling. But not only do we get to support another ministry, but there's actually, because we're a partner, there's potential benefit for us at Cornerstone Vineyard Church. And so if churches, they have about 10 churches that are their support churches, and for people that regularly attend those churches, those people can actually go and get a 50% off discount of counseling. That's a big deal. That's a huge deal. Because I don't know how many times, folks, I hear people say, gosh, I know I could probably benefit from counseling, but I just can't afford it. And so this makes this much more of an option. And ultimately, I was talking to somebody before church started this morning, and so many times we can't afford to not do it, right? And so if we have to go to counseling, let's get that. So this is a huge benefit to us in that. And then also the second thing that we get preferred status when put on a waiting list. If you know anything about counseling centers right now, they're quite overwhelmed. Every single counseling center out there is overwhelmed right now. And so there might be a waiting list, but if you kind of work through the church in the midst of this and you go counseling that, your name, because you would be part of Cornerstone, could potentially be at the top of that list, which would be awesome. Okay, so I'm super pumped about that for multiple reasons. Again, we can support this great ministry, but this could be a benefit to some of you. And so if that interests you, call the church office. We have to work this through the church office. It's not something you can say, hey, I'm part of Cornerstone. They'll go, hey, we're going to talk to Pastor Matt first. All right, those kind of things. But call, and man, we would love to kind of work some of this out with some of you. And my hope is that many of you will take advantage of that and be emotionally healthier because of it. Right? That's a big deal. So, and the other part of that is that we could not do this without your faithfulness to give to the church. This actually is part of how we're funding this is through our benevolence fund. And so we set aside 10% of everything that comes in to go right outside and to support ministries and do this kind of stuff. And so that's the only way we can do this is because of your giving. So thanks for your generosity to the church. It matters. It matters. It matters. It matters big time. Okay? So that's that. And that's it. So we're going to jump into the teaching. So if you want to turn to 1 Timothy chapter 6 today, that's where we're going to land. There are Bibles spread throughout the auditorium if you want to grab one of those, or you can go to sermons.church on a browser on your device and search for Cornerstone Vineyard Church, and the scriptures, all that will be there. If you're in a paper Bible, 1 Timothy is pretty much near the end of the Bible. So if you go to the back, kind of thumb forward just a little bit, you'll run into 1 Timothy. All right, and to get us started today, I want to start by asking you to raise your hand if this statement of you is true. Raise your hand if you've ever made a stupid financial decision. Okay, pretty much everybody in the room. Okay, awesome. All right, if you didn't raise your hand, then we're going to have you come teach this instead of me. All right, but I start with that this morning because I want everybody to raise your hand. If you raised your hand just a second ago, again, raise your hand again. Raise your hand. Okay, everybody look around. Okay, all right. The reality is that that pretty much engulfs all of us, and I wanted to start with that this morning because I think I wanted to get us all on the same page, right? And the same page of the fact that that financial blunders are pretty common, right? Financial blunders are common. I've had them in our lifetime. Before we got married, I had some and those kinds, and I'll probably have some more even in the next few months and years, right? Like they're very, very common. But I wanted us to get on the same page to say that you're not alone if you're in that boat, and we've all kind of been in that boat. But I wanted to start with that also because even though they are common, or maybe even bad financial seasons are common, if I can say it this way, and I think we'd all agree with this, it'd be better if they weren't. Right? It would be, I don't think there's any of us, like, if you could go back and take back your financial blunder, or take back this bad financial decision, I don't think there's any of us that would go, nah, I don't want to do that. Like, we would all go back and change things if we could change things, right? And so I think we would agree that it would just be better if financial blunders and financial mistakes just weren't a thing. And so I start with that because we're going to talk about that today. We're going to talk about financial blunders and how to not do that as much today. But first, I want you to hold that thought. As many of you know, we're in a series. We're actually ending the series today called Main Things, 4 areas that require life's focus. And in this series, we have been talking about 4 areas of life that if we don't consistently have focus in, if we don't spend some time, energy, resources figuring some of these things out in our lives, then we could end up into some pretty negative places. Life can go sideways. Over the last few weeks, right, we talked about physical health, mental and emotional health. By the way, physical health, I just to report to you all, like I've been riding my bike. Yeah, it's been fun. I'm going to get on my bike this afternoon. I'm not drinking pop right now, which is awesome. And I'm eating better, and I'm feeling a little skinnier. Feels good, right? So physical health, we talked about that. Mental, emotional health. Last week, we talked about spiritual health, which is probably one of the most important ones out of all 4. And today, we're going to talk about something that indeed needs our focus. Or if we don't focus on it, man, life, and I know you agree with this, life can get really messy, right? We're going to talk today about financial health. That's what we're going to talk about today. Something that I think that we should talk about way more than we do. I think some people I'm going to say this later too, but I think some people, when they talk about their personal financial situation, they get really weird. And I don't think it should be weird. I think if we could talk about it more, it would be likely that we would be more financially healthy. That's my thought. I actually was thinking this week of a quote. I actually take couples through premarital counseling, and there's this book we go through. It's called Preparing for Marriage. And in this book, there's this quote. There's a money section. We talk about money and those kind of things. And there's a quote in there that I wanted to bring up today. I'm going to bring up on the screen. It's from a financial advisor, Larry Burkett. And it says, "Money is the most common thing in our lives. If you're not communicating about money, you're not communicating about anything." And I thought, okay, now this is a resource for married couples or couples going to get married and those kind of things. And so we know from statistics, right, that many divorces happen, which, by the way, this is totally a side note, but I'm going to say it anyway. Last night, Lee and I were out to dinner, and this is sad to me, folks. We were sitting at a table, and there was this whole slew of women at this other table. There's probably 15, 20 women, and they were celebrating a divorce. Can I tell you how sad that is? Lee and I left last night going, how sad is that there are 15, 20 women celebrating, and the lady had a sign, and it said, this has nothing to do with the message, by the way, just so you know. It was the reality was it said, divorce, the end of an era. And how they were celebrating that. I think that's sad in our culture, and we should not be doing that. So I'm going to jump back to the message now. Sorry, that had nothing to do with... But so this quote, right? Bring that quote back up because I got to get back on board. All right. So this quote, right? So it's about couples, and so we know from statistics that a lot of divorces happen, right, because of bad financial decision making, right? And so it makes sense. But I think this quote makes sense for us too as individuals. Okay, I actually rewrote it this week, and this is how I wrote it. Money is the most common thing in our lives. If we're not considering our financial health, likely we're not considering much at all. I think that you probably had seasons in your life, folks, where you've been very financially focused, and life tends to be a little bit better if we're financially. Doesn't mean we're going to have lots of money, but if we're financially focused, life is a little better, isn't it? And we've had seasons probably when we're not as financially focused, and life gets a little more chaotic, right, at that point. See, our finances have to do with so much of our life. It affects almost every area of our life. It's why we spend about a third of our adult life working for it. We spend all of our free time caring for stuff. How many of you shoveled lots of times this week, right? Right? We're caring for our stuff that we bought, all that stuff, right? And I think I've mentioned this before in a previous message, but we should talk about it a lot because Jesus talked about it a lot. Okay, a couple of statistics. 16 of the 38 parables, those are Jesus' stories, okay? Jesus talks about handling finances and possessions. That's interesting. The Bible offers 500, this is awesome, I love this, 500 verses on prayer, less than 500 on faith, but almost 2,000 verses on finances and possessions, which we're going to look at a couple of them today, okay? 2,000 verses. And so when I see those statistics, right, of the prayer and faith and all that kind of stuff, God knows that we tend to mess this one up because there's so many more verses. And so I think it's something that we ought to be talking about and considering in our lives. And so we're going to do that today. And our driving verses are going to be in this chapter in 1 Timothy chapter 6. I think this will be give us some good things to kind of talk about today. So let's take a look at this, starting in verse 6. It's probably a familiar section of Scripture to many of you, but it says, "But godliness with contentment is great gain. For we brought nothing into the world, and we can take nothing out of it. But if we have food and clothing, we will be content with that. Those who want to get rich fall into temptation," I can't say that word, "fall into temptation and a trap and into many foolish and harmful desires that plunge people into ruin and destruction. For the love of money is a root of all kinds of evil. Some people, eager for money, have wandered from the faith and pierced themselves with many griefs." So we're going to take a look at that section today, a couple things out of that. So our title today is Financial Health. It's ending this series of main things. Financial Health, a focus for financial freedom. And so before I give you a couple points to think about, let's pause and pray. So pray with me. So God, we come to you this morning, God, admitting the fact that pretty much every hand in the room went up that we've made financial mistakes, God. So I think we all could agree that we could probably be better at this than we tend to be sometimes. And so I pray, God, that we would do that. We would, as a result of this time together, that you would make us better at this, not by our own efforts, but by the efforts of the Spirit among us and what you're going to do among us today and tomorrow and the next week and this year. God, you would make us better in all of this. God, that we would be more financially healthy as a result of our time together. Bless this time. Give it to you. In Jesus' name we pray. Amen. Amen. All right, we have 2 points today. You can write this first one in on your handout. Financial focus includes knowing, number one, all of our stuff is temporary. Our stuff is all temporary, right? I try to find a really nice, expensive car. I don't know if that's expensive, but right, the reality is all of our stuff is temporary. This actually comes from verse 7 of the text. It says, "For we brought nothing into the world, and we can take nothing out of it." I'll get you in my mind this week as I was working on this teaching. The reality is, folks, I love the imagery here in the midst of this, right? Like I was thinking about this baby, right? Like the reality is like we all came into the world like that, right? Every single one of us, right? No hat, no sweater or blanket. We came butt naked with nothing. I just said butt naked in church. But it's about a baby, so it's appropriate, right? Right? So like all of us came in this way, right? And what I love is that this text is telling us, right, that like that, if we came in with nothing, the reality is that we are going to go out the same way. We're going to leave with nothing, right? Everything on this planet that we acquire, money, possessions, finance, all that stuff, it all stays here. We can take nothing out with us. And so what that tells us then is as we kind of trickle this down into, okay, so I think we know that. I think we understand that, right? But in the end, that means that everything is temporary. By the way, in the grand scheme of eternity, like maybe if we're lucky, I just celebrated a lady's 101st birthday yesterday. It was awesome. So maybe we get 100 years. 100 years in the reality of eternity is nothing. All right, so it's all temporary. And so as I considered that this week, I just thought about myself. I thought about how much time, Matt, and energy and resources do I spend on things that in the end just aren't going to last. And I had to kind of admit the fact that, folks, I spent a lot of time worrying, toiling over, doing things that all the stuff that just won't last. And so I was thinking that in regards to our topic today, like there are times where I think if I would consider this fact that everything is temporary, I think I would probably make different financial decisions than I usually do. I think this is an accurate statement. I don't think there is probably one time that I have when I wanted to buy something and use finances. Now, there's times where I've prayed and all those kind of things, but I don't think that I've ever had a conversation in my mind of going, hey, remember, Matt, that this is temporary. And I'm thinking if I would have that conversation with myself, I think that I would probably likely make different financial decisions, at least sometimes, on certain things. Now, sometimes I would still do what I was going to do and all those kind of things, but likely I probably would make different decisions. I think sometimes I think we can, I know I can get caught up in the new shiny thing, right? The new shiny thing, it's enticing, right? So I made a list, right? Like maybe a new car or the latest tech, like the phone, the smart TV, the computer, the nicer, the bigger house, the next vacation, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And what happens is I can get caught up in the new shiny thing, and if I could say it this way, I lose financial focus because I want the new shiny thing. Right? I think most of you can probably relate to that, right? The new shiny thing. I know there are plenty of times where Lee and I have ended up in a financial mess, financially unhealthy because we got caught up in the new shiny thing. I was trying to think of a couple things this week, and so I was thinking back, and praise God that he's made me better at this, but like I used to be the guy that would get the new iPhone every time it would come out because I had to have the new iPhone. Can I tell you, all smartphones are the same. They're all the same, right? We don't need, and by the way, it used to be you could get a cell phone for like $50. Now they're like $2,000. They're all the same. So I was thinking about that. I was thinking about when we got our furniture was fine, but we had to have the new furniture, right? But the worst one, the biggest probably financial blunder that Lee and I have ever done is when we had to have a reliable vehicle. You know how many times we can convince ourselves to make poor financial decisions with cars because we need a reliable vehicle? So we spent probably double, if not a little more than double, the money that we actually had for this vehicle. And by the way, it was the coolest thing ever because it was a minivan, right? Gosh, we're going to spend that much money. I want a kind of a cool car, right? But it's a minivan, right? And it's interesting because we convinced ourselves it was okay because we need a reliable vehicle. So we did that. And of course, we could afford the payments and blah, blah, blah. And so we did all that stuff. And then it was interesting because this is how it happens, right? We made the last payment many years later, right? And 2 months later, the transmission died. See, folks, the reality is like I was so excited to make that last payment and then it died on me. And the reality is everything on this planet is temporary. Everything. And I think that, again, if we would think about this, if I would think about this more, I vowed at that point that I was never going to spend that much money on a vehicle ever again. Lee and I don't spend that much money on vehicles because vehicles are nothing but rust buckets and money suckers. Is that a weird word? Money suckers? Is that a real thing? I don't know. But again, there's just this reality of like, man, like in that moment, if Lee and I would have had a conversation, if she would have said to me or I would have said to her, hey, babe, this is temporary. We got to remember this is temporary. I have a feeling that we would have made a different decision. But we didn't have that dialogue. And so I think we have to be honest with ourselves. So we just really have to be honest with ourselves. And we have to go about trying to counteract our human condition. And what I mean by that is that, folks, you and I, we are bent towards more. We have a human condition that we are bent towards more in this life, having more, getting more, gaining more, just more. We are bent towards what I call the never enough. The truth is that in so many ways, you and I are never satisfied, right? Now, we might be satisfied for a little while, but then, right, that new thing comes out. Right, like I mentioned, the TV, right? The TV's just not, hey, do you notice how small our TV looks now? See, some of you chuckle because you've had that conversation, right? Or the reality of, right, there's a few scratches in the paint in the car. You know, the seats are a little worn. Guess it's junk now. We got to get a new one. Do you know you can still drive a car with the seats are torn? Ooh, some kid's not happy out there. Or I was thinking oh man, it's crazy about, I will say this before I say this. Folks, I think rather regular rhythms of rest are really important, right? So vacations are good, but I will tell you this. I think that we can convince ourselves to do vacations that we ought not be doing, right? So you can go, oh man, that vacation to Gatlinburg was great, but see, my friend just went to an all-inclusive in the Keys. That's what I need. Now, after this week, I think we probably all need that a little bit, right? Right? Or I was thinking about the house needs a little work. And so instead of doing the work, we just go, let's go buy a bigger house. Right now is not the right time to buy a house. Sorry, Aaron. But it's expensive. Like even a car. Like I was talking to a car dealer or car salesman here at the church this week. And like there's a guy he sold a car to last summer at $13,000, but now it is worth $20,000. It's not the right time to buy a car. Sorry, salespeople. Right? So I say all of those scenarios because my guess is you can probably relate to one of those, maybe a couple of those, or maybe something that might be similar that I didn't mention. But the truth is that we are bent towards the never enough. We can always convince ourselves that where there's a reason to upgrade, there's a reason to buy some more things. We can convince ourselves all the time we can convince ourselves of this. And so I was actually trying to figure out a way to kind of illustrate this, maybe popular culture, things like that. And I thought about this movie. Anybody seen this movie, The Greatest Showman? Love this. It's a little older now. It's a great movie. If you haven't seen it, just watch it. It's an awesome movie. But it is about P.T. Barnum. He's the circus guy, right? Barnum Bailey Circus, all that stuff, right? And essentially how he got a start in his rise to success. Now, I don't know how accurate the movie is in regards to his real life and all those kind of things. I think it's fairly close. But a good chunk of this movie, why it popped into my mind this week, is that things for Mr. Barnum were never enough. Right? Never enough. He had to go bigger and bigger and more extreme and more and more and more and more and more and more. And ultimately, at the end, I'm going to give you a little spoiler, okay? Like at the end of the movie, it's actually because he had never enough, right? Because he lived in that and he chased the never enough, it actually became his downfall to his marriage and his reputation. Things were never enough for him, and because they were never enough, they got really messy in his life. He lost focus. He lost focus of the fact that, and maybe he never really had the focus of the fact that all this was temporary. Everything is temporary. And by the way, because he lost that focus, it cost him a lot, a ton. Actually, I wasn't even planning on finding this, but I found a quote from him, and my guess is that this is after the blunders of things and the crash and burn of everything. He says, money is in some respects life's fire. It is a very excellent servant, but a terrible master. And so what I like about that is that, see, he finally came to realize, and that's what they show at the end of the movie, and again, I don't know how happy it was in the real life, whatever, but things kind of end up because he started to realize that, man, our stuff, our finances, in the end, it's just temporary. We need finances, right? We need, in this life, we need it. It's a necessity, okay? But the never enough is not the right thing that we should be chasing, and that it's in us. It is in me. But what he even said is that we ought to not be mastered by. He realized that he shouldn't be mastered by, and that's actually scripture, right? Ecclesiastes 5:10. It says, whoever loves money never has enough. Whoever loves wealth is never satisfied with their income. This too is meaningless. Why is this meaningless? Because it's temporary. Matthew 6:24. No one can serve two masters. Either you will hate the one and love the other, or you will be devoted to the one and despise the other. You cannot serve both God and money. Folks, God is not temporary. This life is. And so, right, we get to choose in this life. Now, it's pretty clear what one we ought to choose, right, and pursue, but I think too often, at least in my life, and too often, I continue to chase the never enough. And Lee and I, we try to live within our means and those kind of things and all that, but I still can chase the never enough. My guess is you can too. And when we do that, when we chase the never enough, and it feels like have you ever heard the saying fool me once, shame on you, fool me twice, shame on, how's it go? Fool me once, shame on you, fool me twice, shame on me, right? Like, how many times do I have to have a financial blunder, right? And shame on me. And yet I keep doing this. And my financial health sometimes just continues to go down the tubes. And here's the truth of it all, and this is actually from the text as well. Folks, the goal is, it's not a never enough, it's contentment, right? Verse 6 of our text says, but godliness with contentment is great gain. You want to gain some stuff in life? Contentment's where it's at. Verse 8, but if we have food and clothing, we will be content with that. That's a small list of things. Food and clothing. The truth is we are bent towards this never enough, but we are called to settle more on what's totally enough. I'm going to say that again. We are bent towards the never enough, but called to settle more on what is totally enough. Actually, you can write that in on your handout. Being more content, folks, that's what it's about. True fulfillment and happiness. And by the way, I was listening to another pastor last night, and he was talking about generosity and some of the stuff on his church last night. And it was interesting. He was saying that years ago, we used to the number of advertisements that we see in a given day has tripled, quadrupled. And the more ads we see, the more we think we need stuff. And folks, I think we have to, our culture is pushing us towards more of the never enough. Never enough. Hey, you deserve a vacation. Hey, you deserve the new car. You deserve these kinds of things. You deserve this. How many of you know that really what in this life, because we're sinners, we actually deserve death? That's what we deserve. Contentment will be what satisfies us, not stuff. Couple scriptures and then we'll move on from this point. Hebrews 13:5. Keep your lives free from the love of money and be content with what you have. Proverbs 23. Do not wear yourself out to get rich. Have the wisdom to show restraint. That's what we're talking about. Cast but a glance at riches and they are gone, for they will surely sprout wings and fly off to the sky like an eagle. Again, we've probably all seen that happen to us. See, show restraint. It's not gonna. The reality is and I think in this text, like God's trying to give us some heads up. Like folks, it's all temporary. It's all gonna fly away anyway. Show us some restraint. We got to show more restraint than what we do. So I think that's the first point. Financial focus includes knowing our stuff is all temporary. Point 2, you can write this in. Financial focus includes knowing landmines are everywhere. Landmines are everywhere. Financial landmines, and I heard some, right? Because we know, right? Financial landmines are everywhere, right? It comes from verses 9 and 10 of the text, and we'll look at them individually. Verse 9 says, those who want to get rich fall into temptation and a trap and into many foolish and harmful desires that plunge people into ruin and destruction. See, when we live in the never enough, we live in this, right? And it says here that we fall into a trap, into many foolish and harmful desires. That word plunged is really poignant. Plunged into, right, destruction and ruin, right? Talk about landmines. That's it. And then it goes on verse 10. It says, some people, eager for money, have wandered from the faith and pierced themselves with many griefs. Well, that sounds like a landmine too. Pierced themselves with many griefs, right? It even suggests there's a spiritual landmine, right? They're talking about some have wandered from the faith. Like it can affect, because of our poor financial decision-making and financial health, right? It can affect our relationship with God. I mean, the truth is financial landmines are everywhere. I mean, my guess is that with this many people in the room, there's some of you that you're experiencing one right now. You're experiencing, it happened yesterday, or earlier this week, or beginning of 2022. And so financial focus includes knowing that landmines are everywhere, and being aware of that, and keeping it in the forefront of our mind. And by keeping it for not only like keeping it up here, but also having plans to counteract it, okay? Which is what I want to spend the rest of our time on today. With that in mind, I want to talk about some tools that I think are necessary to doing just that, to keeping this in the forefront of our mind and to have a plan to effectively avoid financial landmines, okay? And it's what I'm calling today the cash-in counterattack, okay? And so this is the idea of like actually keeping our cash in. How many of you would like to keep your cash in, right? That'd be really good, right, to have our cash in. So this is the first thing in this, which is probably not going to be a no-brainer to some of you, but a budget. A budget. Now, of course, many of you guys know what a budget is, but right, the idea of a budget, right, is planning where our money goes, okay? Our expenses versus our income and where we are and planning all that out, right? But this is what I mean by that is I think there are a lot of people who have like the idea of a budget but don't actually have one. I mean, I'm just telling you up front, like I've working with people in over the last 15 years in ministry, there are a lot of people that like the idea of a budget but don't have one. And by the way, if you don't know this, budgeting is actually biblical. Okay, look at this verse from Luke 14. It says, suppose one of you wants to build a tower. Won't you first sit down and estimate the cost to see if you have enough money to complete it? For if you lay the foundation and are not able to finish it, everyone who sees it will ridicule you, saying, this person began to build and wasn't able to finish. You see, budgeting is actually a biblical concept, right? This is something God wants and because he wants us to be good stewards of the things that he has given to us, right? That it is a biblical concept. And so for us to have a cash and counterattack to financial unhealth is that we actually have to have a budget and utilize a budget. For Lee and I, now this can take many, many forms, right? I know there's some people at the church, they literally write out their budget every month on like a legal pad and they just kind of flip stuff. By the way, that's okay. Like it's okay to go a little old school, right? That kind of thing. Lee and I, we actually have an Excel document that we use, and we budget that way. And so we have each month and those kind of things, and Leah helps maintain all that stuff. But I know right now, folks, it is the easiest time in all of human existence to do budgeting, okay? Because of things like this. There's a couple apps. You can write this down. An app called Mint and EveryDollar are budgeting apps that I actually know people who personally use those apps. And here's the cool thing. You can actually, because technology has advanced so much, you can attach your debit card to that and those things. So whenever you make a purchase on your debit card, right, it will automatically update your budget. It's amazing. Right? And so you literally will know, and in real time, you don't even have to sit down with a pen and paper anymore. You can literally do this. And by doing this, then you will know, I love the every dollar one is actually the Dave Ramsey one, right? So you know where every dollar goes, right? He talks about the fact that you should have every dollar work for you instead of you work for every dollar, right? And so, but if I don't know how many times I've sat down with folks and folks that, like, it's amazing to me. We're like, oh, we don't have enough money. And then we sit down and do a budget and you go, yeah, you do. They do. They just don't know. So when they get the bill, they just pay the bill. By the way, you don't have to get the bill and pay the bill right away. You plan for what you're going to pay that bill, right? You plan for it, right? Now, I could go into a whole seminar on how to do this, those kind of things, and I'm not perfect at it by any means, but folks, this matters. Having a budget and working a plan makes a difference. If you want to have cash and counterattack, you got to have a budget. I'm telling you, if you don't have a budget, unless you're just making like millions of dollars, which by the way, we have a building that's coming up, I can talk to you later, okay? Unless you have millions of dollars, right, and you can like live frivolously, but even those people, I would say a budget's really helpful, okay? But most of us, general public, live in this, like if we don't have a budget, we are going to not be financially healthy, period, okay? Now, here's what I'll say with this. If you need help with this, by the way, because it can be a little overwhelming, right? I would love to sit down with you. I can walk you through that. We have, any of the staff can do that. Like, if you know anything about Ben Kittner, I don't know if he's in the room somewhere, but Ben is like crazy about this stuff. Like he loves this stuff, so he could sit down with you. We actually have two gentlemen, one in the church, one outside the church, that are financial counselors, right, that we can also hook you up with. So just call the church office. We would love to set that up with you. And by the way, if you don't take this first step, the rest of these probably won't make a difference either. Okay? So that's the first thing. All right, a budget. Second thing, write this in. Live within our means. Live within our means. What this one means is not buying stuff that we actually don't have money for. Thank you, Doug, for that. I appreciate that. Right? What this means is not buying stuff that we actually don't have the money for. Right? Now, I know that is a foreign concept in 2022 in America. But folks, we should not buy stuff that we actually don't have the money for. Now, I will say there's a few exceptions to this. Like most of us, right, we can't buy a house without financing a house. Okay, so I get that, right? And there might be even emergency situations. Now, I say this with caution because I think there are people who have different definitions of emergencies. Right? Don't talk yourself into an emergency. You know what an emergency is, okay? But like, so for example, if we got, a foot of snow this week, and if your roof starts to leak, you may not have $12,000 on hand. Okay, so you might have to finance that, okay? But for the rest of this, here's what I would say. Finance nothing if you can help it. Literally, finance nothing if you can help it. Here, I think that what happens a lot of the time, folks, is that we say to ourselves, well, we can afford the payment. Can I tell you that's a landmine? That is a landmine. By the way, to go back to Lee and I's car situation, right? When we bought the car, we were living in a missionary's home, right? And they were over in Sierra Leone, and so they needed somebody to take care of the house. It was a huge blessing to us. It was really cheap rent for us and all that kind of stuff. But then they came back from Sierra Leone, found out she had cancer. They wanted their house back, and so our circumstances changed, and now we couldn't afford the payment anymore. See, circumstances can change. Right? And so the reality is that I think we live too much in a culture of we can afford the payment so we can do it. And I think that's actually a major landmine. We need to more often say, we don't have the money for it, so we're not going to do it. Show restraint. So back in Proverbs, right? It said 23, it said, show restraint. If I can say it this way, if you don't have the money for it, just say no. I'm going to go back to our dare days, right? Just say no. We got to show more restraint. By the way, just so you know, the church does this to live in our means. Just to be completely transparent with you, at the end of 2021, we were seeing a downward trend in our giving here at the church. And so we had dreams and visions and plans of what we wanted to do, right? And so we don't do massive increases, but we were going to try to do a weekly increase so we could actually do a little bit more on some plans, things that we want to do this year. And the board was literally about ready to approve that budget. And I just felt the Spirit like prick on my heart, like, nope, we can't do that right now. We got to live within our means. And so we continued to stay at the current budget that we had at the end of 2021 because we want to live within our means. We want to be good stewards of the finances that God has given to us. So we kept that current budget. And that will continue to be our process, by the way, right? We see what comes in and we adjust based on what's happening to come in and those kind of things. And so it's important for us, if the church is doing this, because I think it's a good, a God-given thing, then folks, we should also do it in our personal finances, because then, by the way, it's just a side note, like if we have a budget and we live within our means, then how many of you know we can also be a little more generous? It's actually... like I said, I was listening to my friend Craig Groeschel. Man, if you don't ever listen to Craig Groeschel, I love the guy. He's Life Church pastor. Just love him. But he was talking about generosity last night, and he was talking about generous people don't do it by chance. Generous people plan to be generous. And I was like, I like that. And then he was talking about the reality of God's kind of challenged him in the reality of rounding up. And so he shared a story last night about... There was this girl that he was his server at a restaurant, and he noticed that her service was just really poor, but he still gave her a tip and actually rounded up just a little bit. He goes, it's pretty sad. It wasn't even that much of a roundup, but he rounded up just a little bit. But come to find out, years later, he found out that she knew who he was, knew about his church, didn't like him, didn't like the church, and so that's why she intentionally gave him bad service. But he still rounded up. And because he rounded up, she then, when her life got crazy and catastrophic, she called the church. She's a follower of Jesus. She's attending the church. Folks, we ought to be rounding up, right? We ought to be rounding up. And so even for him, he's talking about he's now living this life. And I thought this was kind of cool. And Lee and I had a great conversation last night while we were driving out to dinner about this. He's talking about the fact that he now lives his life rounding up, where if he buys a shirt, he gives a shirt. If he buys a pair of pants, he gives a pair of pants. If he buys a phone, he gives a phone. And he said God even challenged him where it came to buy a car, give a car. And he goes, I kind of question God on that one. Because he's like, how about I give it to somebody for a real fair price and give some of that money away? But and then he took it even a step further. He said, we now if we buy a car, we give a car, and we don't just stop there. We round up, and we round up we then get it detailed, and we fill the tank up with gas, and we hand deliver it to the person. How many of you would love to live that way? I would love to live like that. And so Lee and I even talked about, we just got a vehicle last year, and we're going, it was fine. The heat didn't work, but everything else worked. And yet we scrapped it. I'm like, how cool would it be if being a generous person, if I could just done it, it wouldn't have been that hard to get it all cleaned up. I mean, it's a minivan, but right? And I'm like, oh man, I want to do that. But again, I can't do that if I'm not intentional that way. Right? And if I'm not living within, I'm totally going off my script. I'm sorry, you guys. But if I don't live within my means, I can never get to that place. Right? We can never get to that place. I think this one is the one, I think this part's really crucial, because this is the one, living within our means, that I think is the easiest to fudge on. This is the one to be less headstrong in. But I think it's the one we need the most. Now, I will say this, and then I'll move on. For some of you today, to live within your means, you might need to leave here and sell some stuff. You may need to, I made a list, the TV, sell the TV, sell the Apple Watch, the furniture, blah, blah, blah. I was actually thinking about, years ago, I was doing premarital counseling with this couple, and we were going through the budget stuff in the premarital counseling, and come to find out, we got to the end of the line, and they were $400 short every month. And then I looked, and he has a truck. And his truck payment, by the way, trucks are expensive. He has a truck. And his trunk, by the way, was $400. So I looked at him and I said, sell the truck. And I said, well, before I tell you sell the truck, I said, do you use it for your livelihood? Do you use it for your job? Because if you use it for your job, he's like, no, I just really like the truck. I said, sell your truck. You literally have $400 you're not making every month. And that's your payment. Sell the truck. So for some of you, you might need to walk out of here and sell your truck. Some of you, I'm looking at Katie. Katie, some of you, we've used this before, but Katie is living in an RV in New Carlisle right now so that she can get, to be budget conscious and get out of debt. She sold her house. That's a big deal. So some of you may need to sell some stuff. I was actually thinking students, and if you're a student, just give you a little bit of advice. Please, gosh, don't do this. Please don't spend $95,000 going to college. It's crazy. By the way, my first house was $94,000. You could buy a house. No, not today. You can't buy a house, right, Aaron? But you could, so Live within your means. There are ways you can do college and get a college education, students, without breaking the bank. You can do it. And some of it's diving into scholarships, some of it between you and your parents and whatever, all that kind of stuff. You can do it. Like Lee and I, we are still paying our student loans. There are decisions that we could have made that if we would have made those decisions, we would already be out of debt. And we didn't, because we didn't live within our means. So think about that. I think it's super important. Okay? That's the second thing. Third thing, you can write this in, is tithe. I think some of you knew this one was probably coming, tithe, right? What that means, give 10% of your finances to God. Now, some people are like, okay, well, Matt, does that mean 10% of gross or net? That's splitting hairs. You can decide that, okay? But I will tell you this. It might sound counterproductive. You're like, well, hey, if I'm in a financial situation, why would I give money to God? Because don't I need that money to? And here's, folks, this is actually may surprise you. This actually may be, out of all these things on this list, may be the best thing that you could do. Amen. It actually says, well, thank you. I like that. Matthew 16:25 says, for whoever wants to save their life, look at this, will lose it. But whoever wants to lose their life, for me, will find it. Folks, if we want financial health, we have to lose some stuff for God. And by the way, this is something if you're a follower of Jesus. Now, if you're not a follower of Jesus, keep exploring Jesus. But if we've said yes to Jesus, by the way, he gets all of us, including our finances. Okay, it says in Malachi chapter 3, it says, bring the whole tithe into the storehouse, that there may be food in my house. Test me in this, says the Lord Almighty, and see if I will not throw open the floodgates of heaven and pour out so much blessing that there will not be room enough to store it. This may be one of the best things that you could do, because the God of the universe can go, hey, you give me what's mine, and I will pour blessing all over you. I've seen that personally happen in my life. I'm not going to belabor that one. Next one. This last one is take an assist. Fill that in. Take an assist. I started already mentioning this, but folks, I think it is okay to get financial help. It's okay. And so a couple of ideas for you. Take Financial Peace University, right? Because of the pandemic, by the way, Financial Peace University is mostly online now. You can literally do most of it online. Take it online. Take Financial Peace University. Go see a financial advisor. Let them speak into your finances, give you counsel and direction. Meet with a friend. If you look at a friend, you go, whoa, you've got your life together and financially. Can you tell me what you did and how you do it? Meet with somebody. Let them speak into your life. There's actually a proverb that says in Proverbs 20:18, you can play whenever you want to, Maddie. It says, plans succeed through good counsel. Plans succeed. Financial health succeeds by good counsel when we let other people in. Take an assist. Again, I said this earlier, right? I think, again, we get so weird when we talk about finances. Can I say this? Get over it. Get over it. I think we got to get over the fact that, by the way, we will never get healthy in anything if we don't admit to somebody else that we have a problem. There might be some reality is that get over the fact that you're, just talk to somebody. Get the financial advisor. There are things that can be done. Just get over the fact so that you can your plan can succeed. My plan can succeed. And by the way, I would say this to you, some of you in the room, you're in a financially healthy place. Get somebody else involved so you can stay that way. I think we need to remember, the point will come up, financial focus includes landmines are everywhere. Keep it at the forefront of our mind and have this counterattack. We've got to have this counterattack, again, just to reiterate these things, a budget, living with our means, tithing, taking a sick. Because if we do these things, we talked about, and try to remember that everything is temporary. I think that's the one that kind of really struck me for this message. Is I do think that we will see more consistent reality of financial health in our lives. And I don't think there's a single one of us here today that we wouldn't want more financial health. I think we all want to be more financially